It's fair to say that people don't have a lot of trust. I know that a lack of trust has existed always. This is nothing new, but I think the intensity of it's pretty big. I remember when I used to trust my employer. I remember back, when I used to trust companies. It's so different today. We don't trust our doctors. We don't trust our companies. We don't trust our bosses. We don't trust the government. Well, that's definitely not new. But you understand what I'm saying. There's not enough trust in the world. And the distrust is part of our mental anxiety. It's part of why our society is having a mental health crisis. So it's important, right? It's an important topic. But I'm not here to talk about trusting others. I'm here to talk about trusting yourself. They say you can't truly love another until you love yourself. And I'm going to say the adage is true for trust. You can't truly trust another until you trust yourself. So today's topic is self-trust. We're going to talk about what self-trust is, the role that it plays in decision-making, why it's important to trust your feelings, what the ripple effect is in your life of self-trust, and how to overcome barriers to self-trust. And we're also going to talk about that little gut feeling or intuition and why it's important to trust it. So welcome, and let's get started. This is Flavors of Emotions, expanding your emotional palette for a tastier life. My name is Kim Korte. Together, we explore how to make sense of our feelings through the lens of a chef, understanding flavors and a recipe. I am here to help you refine your emotional palette to differentiate the emotions that shape your world. Before we get started, let's talk about the definition of trust, at least from the opinion of a dictionary. Trust is a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something, where self-trust is the confidence in your ability to make decisions, to feel your emotions, to act in alignment with your values. It's the foundation of self-reliance and authenticity, enabling you to navigate life with assurance rather than this constant self-doubt. And I kind of want to go back to that term of, or I should say phrase of having trust in your values, because values are so important. If you think about why you don't have trust in organizations or the company that you work for, often it's because they are not aligned with their values. And so that means that as an organization, they probably don't have self-trust, because if they were aligned with their values, they have trust in who they are as an organization, right? So think about for yourself. If you are not living in alignment with your values, you might not even know truly what your values are. So it would make you have a difficult time having self-trust. I'm going to tell you why it matters. Because when you trust yourself, you're less likely to rely on external validation or be swayed by others' opinions. You have that confidence, and you can take ownership of your decisions, of everything, of your life. Over time, experiences of being criticized, ignored, invalidated, it can undermine whatever trust that you had. And it can lead to, second guessing or overthinking things, because you think that trust would be something that you're just born with, but it's not. It's something that you develop. It's a skill. And so it can be cultivated through intentional practices and reflection, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And the role that it takes in your decision-making is gigantic. If you have trust or you don't have trust, it will reveal itself in your decision-making, because when you trust yourself, you're more decisive. You are less likely to ruminate, and you are better able to handle the outcomes of your decisions. You know what? They may not be right, but you trust it. And we'll get more into that in a second. But I want to go back to that word ruminate, because it's a word I love. If you look at a cow, they ruminate. They chew on their food. They're eating their hay or grass or whatever it is, and they chew, 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 chew. They swallow and then regurgitate it, and then they chew again. I think they have 4 stomachs. If I remember my childhood education about cows correctly, I can still see the cow that was chewing the cud when I learned about their 4 stomachs as a field trip. I was on a field trip as a grade schooler, and it was just gross to me to think that they would vomit it up, but they do. And so do we with our decisions. We are unsure. And so what does that do? That leads to a lack of confidence in yourself, and also other people don't have confidence in you. It can lead to analysis paralysis, anxiety, regret, even when your choices are good ones. If you make a great decision and you're like, oh, I don't know, was that right? I want to emphasize that self-trust doesn't mean you're always making the right decision. It means you're trusting that you will handle whatever comes next, good or bad, because we do make both kinds of decisions, and that's what educates us. That's how we learn. If you can start small, making a minor decision, what to eat, what to wear, and don't seek outside input. Do I look good in this? Forget it. Do you look good in it? You tell me, meaning you look in the mirror, ask yourself, do I look good? And if you say yes, trust that decision. And that might sound really silly, but it's a great start. And then you build on it. And then start, as you build, I don't know, keep a journal of what decisions you made right and what ones you made wrong. And then what did you learn from the wrong decision? And how did you feel about the wrong decision? Important stuff. So these feelings that I'm talking about, they are our communication. There are signals on a dashboard. They are the internal dialogue that takes place that tells us something. It tells us something important about our inner world and what's going on in our outer world. And trusting these feelings, it doesn't mean you act on every impulse. It means validating and understanding them as they arise. I've said this many, many times when I talk about feelings. They're not facts. Our feelings are built from those same experiences where we learn to not trust ourselves. And so if we can connect to the feeling and then start to understand which ones are telling us something that's more accurate and which ones might be coming from another place and not really pertinent or even true, something that I call it the emotion recipe you don't want to cook up anymore. It's so helpful to learn to trust your feelings, right? Because you're learning to connect to them better and decide which ones you can trust and which ones you can't. And this goes back to the science of emotion that I talk about all the time, and that they are a construction that are based on perceptions, past experience, context from those. When we can tune in to our feelings in our body, this builds emotional trust, which underlies everything, every decision, every action, every belief. All of these things are underpinned by our feelings, and those are created through our experiences. And so by practicing our interoceptive awareness and being able to tune into feelings that might be based on an experience that doesn't really fit or doesn't really need to be used anymore. I call those the recipes you just don't want to cook or that are distasteful, the emotion recipes, I should say, that are you don't want to cook or distasteful. So building that emotional trust is important. And don't judge your feelings as good or bad or positive or negative. Just find out what they're telling you. I say all the time, emotions aren't positive or negative. their outcomes are. So you can have it and feel it, but it's whether you act on it or say, this is not true. Just like I said, feelings aren't always facts. So that part of your self-trust journey, being able to connect and learning how to trust your feelings. And there's a greater ripple effect of self-trust, because when you trust yourself, it affects every area of your life. You're more confident, you're assertive, you're resilient, and people who trust themselves are often inspiring trust in others. So people trust people who trust themselves. And this is especially important if you want to be a leader. How many of us have had leaders that don't inspire confidence because they aren't trustworthy? Just like I said, if you have a company who can't align their actions with the company's stated values, how can you trust them? So how can you trust the leaders? So if you see a leader who's living in alignment with those values, who's keeping to a core belief and behavior that is in alignment with what they say, with what they do, and it falls in line with the company, inspiring, right? So think about that. Is that what you want to be? And it's not just in an organization. It's in your life, in your family, in your friendships, in how you deal with people in the world. It's amazing, because I can tell you from someone who, I've always been pretty confident, but I've had many a time where I have done that rumination a lot less now. I can talk myself out of it a lot quicker, but I would dream about it and stay up. And for days, I would think about something I said, some decision I made, and just geek out on it. I mean, just go totally nuts thinking I did the wrong thing. But the thing is, it's over. It's done. What did I learn from it? And that's helping me now to make better decisions and not freak out my mind over it, because it does affect your mental health. And so that anxiety that I had, I'm sure you've experienced, and that's not good. And it can create unnecessary depressive feelings. And it's because we don't have a sense of control and self-efficacy. So how can we overcome some barriers that are keeping us from trusting ourselves? There's been barriers up, right, for a lot of us. Past failures, societal conditioning, fear of judgment of others. We've had people who were critical of us, maybe a humiliating experience, or, like I said, societal expectations can be really impactful. And so we need to kind of work with that fear. So if you have a fear of failure, why not shift your perspective? Failure isn't a dead end, but it's a learning experience. It's something that you can grow from. There's a company I read about who had a book of failures in the office, and everybody, if they made a mistake, they would write it in this book. And the reason is that other people could see, and it was not a small book. Other people can see that mistakes are made by everybody. It's part of being human. One of the best parts of being human is learning. And we're here to learn. We're here to learn about ourselves, who we are, what we want, what we don't want, how to be more successful, and in whatever it is that we want to do. And failure is a key component and a necessary component for us to fine-tune and hone who we are and what we do. I know this is going to sound really strange. Believe me, you will. But I want you to apologize to yourself for your past, for times when you ignored your needs or you didn't speak up, the ways that you failed yourself, that you think you failed yourself, and just apologize to make yourself feel better, because we've all made them, and we all need self-forgiveness too. Doesn't it feel better when you apologize to someone and they forgive you, it's like, oh, such a relief. So apologize to yourself. Forgive yourself for your past mistakes, your self-betrayals. And then it will start to relieve your mind of those mistakes so they won't keep you and hold you back as you go on your trusting journey. And then practice small acts of integrity, like following through on commitments to yourself. And then that way you start to build trust in yourself. Even if it's just a tiny, tiny little thing, build on it. If you say, I am going to do something good for myself this week. I'm going to schedule a weekend away with my spouse. I'm going to do, whatever, and follow through. That's trust building. Once again, it may sound silly, it's small, but it's a start. Now I kind of want to take a few minutes and talk about intuition. Intuition is this little quiet, nonverbal voice that I feel we talk about it usually in our gut. And it normally arises from your brain's processing information, and a lot of information. And it's all based on prior experiences, but it's also based on what's going on around you. And we have a small capacity for cognitive recognition. And what I mean by that is that there's 11 million bits per second of information going on in your brain, and we can cognitively capture, I think it's like 40 bits of information. It's really, really tiny. I mean, the most I saw in one post was 120, and I think that's like way, way, way too high. So our brain can talk to us through these intuitive feelings, through these gut feelings. And so trusting that gut feeling requires distinguishing it from other things like fear, like we just talked about. Fear would be urgent and anxious, chaotic. That's not an intuitive feeling. That is, I should say, an intuitive feeling would be more quiet. It would be soft. It would be a little bit more muted. It's not going to be like wah, in your face. And the same too with overthinking. Overthinking kind of works the same way. You're like thinking about it and thinking about it. There's some anxiety with it. It's not usually overly calm. So learn to distinguish when it's intuition so you can start to build your confidence in some low stakes situations where your intuition is playing a factor, and then see how it goes and start to, like I said, build that confidence and reflect on times when your intuition paid off and it really helped you. That's like the brain kind of intuition, but there's another intuition that they have yet to truly explain. And I can tell you, I've learned to trust mine by experience. And this is not something that's based on a lot of data going on around me or my past experience. I'm going to give you one specific example where my intuition was screaming at me and I listened. And it was a coworker. So I'll give you a little context. I was working on a project at my former employer. I was moving far away, and I worked closely with someone on this project so that I could hand it over to her when I left the company. And her name was Debbie. And so Debbie and I were quite close because of working so hard together. It was quite enjoyable. And one day, a few months, I was say 6 months or so after I had left, maybe even longer, but it doesn't matter. Some time had passed and I was in my car driving on the 5 freeway, and I just had this feeling, this overwhelming feeling that something was wrong. It is gut feeling. And it emanated from my gut, and it wasn't chaotic and it wasn't fear. It was telling me to call Debbie. Something was wrong with her health. And I called her, and she was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you called. I just got diagnosed with cancer." It was very devastating, but it told me something about my gut. And unfortunately, she passed from it 2 years later. but your gut talks to you all the time. Your whole body talks to you all the time. It's telling you, something behind me isn't right, or something around me isn't right. And how you don't have eyes in the back of your head, but sometimes it feels like you do, right? Because you get a feeling. And so trusting those feelings is important. It can make the difference between a good situation and a bad one. And don't think you're paranoid. Just listen to it and learn to trust it. Maybe sometimes we are a little paranoid, but when we gain that trust of having so many experiences that just weren't right, like around someone, it just felt dangerous, or some situation just felt dangerous and we just left. That's important. And that's a part of self-trust. So you can see how important self-trust is. And if you need some help learning how to connect to your emotions, learning how to trust yourself, I'm here. I know lots of people who can help you. I suggest learning how to connect to yourself, that interoceptive system that tells you how you feel inside. And you can do that by reading my book, because I explain it. I'm going to be offering courses soon, and I'm not sure if it's going to be late January or early February, but I'm definitely going to be offering either a 4-hour workshop or 4 weeks. And I might just offer both just to see what people prefer. But I'm definitely going to be trying to do as much as I can to help people learn how to connect to themselves and to build self-trust, to build self-confidence, to build self-love, all of those self things. Because like I said earlier, in order to get what we want from others in the way of those emotions, we need to learn what it feels like inside for us. But more importantly, we need to identify what has to happen around us in our life for us to feel trust. And we're just going to stick with trust right now. We can do this with all emotions. But what has to happen for me to feel trust? You would do this with a piece of paper and a pen. I'd say a pad of paper and a pen. And you just sit there and say, and if it was me, I'd say, Kim, what has to happen for you to feel trust? And I'd write it down. Then I'd say, Kim, what else has to happen for you to feel trust? And I would write it down. And I'm using my name purposefully because it's a certain trigger in your brain to recognize you. And so you go through that until you're done. And then you say, okay, Kim, what has to happen for you to feel distrust? And then you write it down. And then you look at the results and you don't judge it. You don't do any of that. If something comes up and it sounds stupid, it's okay. Just write it down and then look at it. It's going to tell you a story. And I've done this with people in situations where we aren't dealing with just one emotion, but with many emotions, the emotions that they want to feel more of and they want to feel less of. And you can do that trust and just switch it up for self-trust, to not trust yourself or to trust yourself. The point is that you'll learn so much about yourself, and you will see how the feelings of not trusting are recipes that you probably got somewhere along the road that don't taste emotionally very good. Emotion recipes that we cook up potentially on a regular basis that don't serve us and that are emotionally distasteful. This work is so important for yourself because it helps you create the world that you want to live in. It helps you create more of what you want and to recognize what you don't want more readily and more specifically. So that's it for today. If you want to reach out to me, you always know where to go, kimkorte.com. And you can pick up my book, Yucky Yummy Savory Sweet, on Amazon. It's called Yucky Yummy Savory Sweet, Understanding the Flavors of Emotions. You can follow me on Instagram. You can follow me on where am I? Blue Sky now, LinkedIn. Yep, those are my main places. So Thank you for listening. I appreciate you. And I always, 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 always recognize that your time is precious and the time that you spent listening to me is important time. And that's why it means so much for me personally. And I am very appreciative. So until next time, I'm Kim Korte. Bye.